The richest man in Rome had more money than the entire Roman government. Not some of it, all of it. His personal fortune was roughly equal to a full year of Rome's total tax revenue. He had his own private workforce. He owned more of the physical city of Rome than Rome itself did. He helped fund the careers of the men who would become the most famous figures in all of ancient history. And he threw it all away. Not in a bad investment, not in a financial crash. In a single afternoon, in a desert he had no business being in. Fighting a war he was completely unprepared for a reason that had nothing to do with money. His name was Marcus Licinius Crassus, and this is the story of how the wealthiest man in the ancient world let one very human feeling, the need to be taken seriously, eat him alive. Most people who know anything about ancient Rome know Caesar. They know Pompey, maybe Augustus. But before any of those men got anywhere near the top, there was Crassus. He was the money behind the machine, the man who made things possible while everyone else was busy giving speeches and winning battles. He was born around 115 BC into a respectable but not spectacular Roman family. His father had been a consul and a general. Decent status, but not wealthy enough to matter in the way Crassus would eventually matter. Then Rome went through one of its ugliest periods, a civil war, a dictatorship, and a purge. And Crassus saw his opening. Here is how Roman prescriptions worked. When the dictator Sulla took power, he published lists of his enemies. Romans he wanted dead. Anyone on the list could be killed on sight, and the killer received a cash reward. The dead man's property was confiscated by the state and then auctioned off, almost always at a fraction of its real value, to Sulla's allies and associates. Crassus was one of those allies. He bought confiscated property at rock-bottom prices. Land, houses, entire estates, all of it going cheap because the previous owners were either dead or running for their lives. He got so aggressive about it that, at some point, he apparently added names to the prescription lists himself. Men who weren't originally targeted but whose property he wanted. When Sulla found out, he cut Crassus off. But by that point, the damage was done and the money was made. He had his seed capital. And now he needed a system. Here's what most people don't think about when they picture ancient Rome. It was one of the most densely packed cities in the ancient world. At its height, possibly close to 1 million people living within its walls. Those people mostly lived in apartment blocks called insulae. Tall, cheaply built, wooden frame structures. No running water above the ground floor. Everyone cooked on open flames. Streets were so narrow that neighbors across from each other could reach out their windows and shake hands. And there was no fire department, none, anywhere in the city. When something caught fire in Rome, which it did regularly, because it was almost impossible that it wouldn't, the only thing you could do was grab a bucket, scream for your neighbors, and hope. There was no trained crew, no organized response. You just watched it burn until it stopped, or until it spread to your building too. Crassus built a fire brigade. He bought 500 slaves and trained them as a team. Not just firefighters, but architects and builders, too. Men who could demolish a burning section of a building to stop the fire spreading, and then rebuild it once the fire was out. When a building caught fire in Rome, his men would race to the scene, and then they would stop. They would stand there watching, while Crassus walked over to the panicking property owner and started talking. He would offer to buy the building, right now, for whatever price Crassus decided it was worth, which was almost nothing because it was on fire. The owner had two options: refuse and lose everything, or sell to Crassus at his price and walk away with at least something. Most people sold. Then Crassus's men put the fire out, repaired the building, and added it to his portfolio. Plutarch writes, and this is a direct quote, "In this way the largest part of Rome came into his possession." Beyond real estate, he ran silver mines using slave labor. He was deeply involved in tax farming, collecting taxes on behalf of the Roman state in the provinces and keeping a percentage. He trained slaves in skilled trades, accounting, teaching, medicine, and either sold them or leased them out for ongoing income. Every arm of the ancient economy that could be turned into a money machine, Crassus had a hand in it. By the time his fortune reached its peak, he had grown it from less than 300 talents. That's where Plutarch says he started, to over 7,000 100 talents. That translates to roughly 229 tons of silver. And in Roman terms, it was roughly equal to the entire annual tax revenue of the Roman state. One man, one personal fortune, equal to a whole government's income for a year. And it was not enough. In Rome, money was power. But money alone did not make you great. What made you great was military glory, a battlefield victory, a triumph. The formal parade through the streets of Rome, a victorious general riding in a chariot while his soldiers marched behind him and the crowds cheered. Julius Caesar was in Gaul, conquering territory nobody had ever conquered before. Pompey had already swept through the eastern Mediterranean, destroyed pirates, reorganized whole kingdoms, and come home to a triumph so grand people still talked about it. Both of them had military reputations. Both of them were names that meant something beyond just being rich. Crassus had money, and Crassus wanted what they had. In 60 BC, the three of them formed what historians call the First Triumvirate. Not an official thing, no ceremony, no law. Just a private arrangement between three of the most powerful men in Rome to support each other and stay out of each other's way. Crassus's money, Caesar's ambition, Pompey's reputation. They carved up the Roman political system between them. For a while it worked. But Crassus kept watching Caesar add to his legend and kept feeling the gap between them. Caesar had legions, Pompey had a legacy. Crassus had a property portfolio and a fire brigade. When he was assigned the province of Syria in 55 BC, he saw his chance. Syria sat right on the border of Parthia, the great empire to the east, stretching from modern Iraq all the way through Iran and beyond, wealthy, powerful, and officially at peace with Rome. Crassus did not care about the peace. He was 60 years old and had never commanded a serious military campaign in his life. He had Pompey and Caesar's careers in his head and a desperate need to join them. He looked east and saw one campaign that could change how history remembered him. He had no idea what was waiting for him. In 53 BC, Crassus crossed the Euphrates with 7 legions, approximately 40,000 soldiers. His son Publius came with him, commanding the cavalry. This was going to be his triumph, his moment. The Parthian king sent a general named Surena to stop him. Surena brought roughly 10,000 men, far outnumbered by the Romans on paper. But those 10,000 men were cavalry, heavy armored horsemen called cataphracts, and light horse archers who could fire accurately at a full gallop. Roman legions were the finest heavy infantry in the world. They had been winning battles for centuries. But they won by closing the distance, getting in tight, working in formation. Every Roman battlefield assumption was built around fighting other infantry. Surena knew this. He chose his ground carefully. Flat, open desert near the town of Car-E, where the Romans had no cover, no elevation, no advantage. And then he let the Parthian horse archers go to work. They circled the Roman formations just outside sword range and poured arrows in. When the Romans charged, the Parthians turned and rode away. No infantry in history could outrun a horse. When the Romans stopped and tried to regroup, the Parthians circled back and started shooting again. The Romans crouched under their shields and waited for the arrows to run out. They didn't. Surena had hundreds of camels carrying nothing but spare arrows. The horse archers could keep going all day. Crassus ordered his son Publius to take the cavalry and break the Parthian line. Publius charged with 1,000 Gallic horsemen, and the Parthians retreated in front of him, and then turned, surrounded his entire force, and destroyed them. And then they came back to the main Roman formation. They held up Publius's head on a spear and displayed it in front of the Roman lines. Ancient sources describe Crassus standing completely still when he saw it, his army falling apart around him, men dying, and Crassus standing there, not moving, not speaking. By the time it was over, 20,000 Romans were dead. Another 10,000 were captured and taken as slaves to the far edges of the Parthian Empire. It stands as one of the worst military disasters in Roman history, against an enemy that was outnumbered 4-1. Surena offered to negotiate, a meeting, a parley, some kind of arrangement for the survivors. Crassus's remaining soldiers more or less forced him to go. They were done. They were desperate. They wanted out of that desert. Crassus walked out to meet the Parthians and was killed there. What happened next depends on the source. Some ancient writers claim the Parthians poured molten gold into his mouth after he died. A final joke about a man who could never get enough. Whether that actually happened or whether it's a story that got attached to him because it was too poetically perfect, not to repeat, nobody knows for certain. What we do know is that his head was cut off and sent to the Parthian king Orodes, who was at that moment watching a performance of a Greek play, Euripides' Bacchae, at his court. The Greek actors reportedly used Crassus's head as a prop in the play. The fortune didn't save him. The fire brigade couldn't put out this fire. The 7,100 talents, the silver mines, the property portfolio, the private army of architects, none of it was there in the sand. There is a postscript to all this that I find almost unbearably ironic. Surena, the general who did all this, who beat a Roman army 4 times his size, who killed the richest man in Rome, was executed by the Parthian king shortly afterwards. Orodes was jealous of the fame Surena's victory had brought him. He had Surena killed. Even winning wasn't safe. Everybody in this story lost something. The thing that gets me about Crassus is that he had already won. By any reasonable measure, by any standard a person could apply in 55 BC, he had won. More money than a government. Political power that most men could never touch. A seat at the table with the 2 most consequential people of his age. He could have stayed home. He could have kept doing what he was brilliant at. Buying, building, financing, accumulating. He probably would have outlived Caesar, outlived Pompey, watched the whole republic crack and crumble around him from a very comfortable position. Instead, he went to prove something to himself. That he wasn't just the money guy. That he could stand next to Caesar and Pompey and be remembered the same way. He is remembered. Just not the way he wanted. The richest man in Rome. The man who literally owned the city. Who had figured out how to turn other people's disasters into his wealth. Died broke in a desert because money wasn't enough. Because he needed something no amount of gold could actually buy. There is something in that worth sitting with for a while. And subscribe if you want to keep following where this goes. Because what happened to Caesar and Pompey after Crassus died is where the story gets really dark.